Hey, how's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? Excited for tonight's show. Excited for tonight's show. Welcome to the experience. Tonight we are doing all 32 teams, recapping the free agency, kind of just giving our love and our hates, kind of what transpired and what we think about it, right? Starting off, we're gonna get right into it. We got a lot of teams to cover. Obviously, 32 teams. We got a little time to do it. Again, these are our love and our hates for the free agency of all 32 NFL teams this season. So we're going to start off right off the bang. We're going to go alphabetically here. Arizona. Big one was Josh Sweat, obviously. Retained a couple players. Did get Baron Browning and Dalvin Tomlinson from the defensive line, which was solid, along with Josh Sweat. For Arizona, right? I love the Josh Sweat signing. I think he's a winning player through and through. I hope it works out for the guy. I can never say the word, but the past with Jonathan Gannon definitely helps him. He's been under Jonathan Gannon as a defensive coordinator, and now he goes and plays with him as a head coach. He's going to have that experience with him, right? He had a career high 11 sacks under Jonathan Gannon in 2022. So it kind of sees what he can maybe do under a Jonathan Gannon defense. So, this may be a little exciting for Cardinal fans to hear, but I think that it may work out. A couple of things I hated, though, the exodus and just the lack to fix the defensive tackle position. Okay. Tomlinson was smart. Dalvin Tomlinson was smart. He's a run stopper. Smart signing. However, they lost a lot of snaps last season to free agency. They just lost a lot of the defensive snaps that were on the defensive line as a whole. They lost to free agency this year. So it's a lot of new faces. New isn't always bad, but new isn't always good either. So we'll see how it pans out for them. Philly is in order. Let's go. Philly is in order. Boom. So Arizona's done. Moving on to Atlanta. Some I didn't really like anything, and we'll get into that. But Leonard Floyd, Divine Diablo, Mike Hughes, corner. They brought back Mike Hughes, Edge Morgan Fox, and safety Jordan Fuller. For me, real subpar. I actually have them bottom ranked in the free agency ranking. However, they didn't have a lot of money to spend, guys. Obviously, they're still eating on the Kirk Cousins contract, and so they're shitting in their own bed. But for me, again, Love was pretty much nothing. Again, not a lot of cap space to work with, but you focus completely on the defensive side, and you did nothing. And again hate I pretty much everything, for the Atlanta Falcons. Little cap space, nothing moves the needle, right? Nothing that they did absolutely moved the needle. Floyd was honestly due to a lack of pass rush, in my opinion. Fox was probably a handy player at one point, but past his prime. Diablo doesn't make sense for me because he's only depth behind Troy Anderson and Caden Ellis. Caden Ellis came out last year, broke out last year, guys. I don't see Diablo being a starting piece. So why pay him that? Again, all the money was spent on defense, and you still did nothing. It just for me was not an overall good look for the Atlanta Falcons. Moving on here to the Baltimore Ravens. A couple names here to push out. Ronnie Stanley. They brought back Ronnie Stanley, which I'll get into, but I thought was a huge piece for them. A little familiarity over there at left tackle. and they brought in a new face in D-Hop. I was talking about a month ago when this happened, and this kind of seems like the wide receiver graveyard. I mean, we look at Steve Smith Sr. Yes, he was good in Baltimore, but he wasn't what he was in Carolina. Jeremy Maclin, Odell Beckham Jr., Des Bryant. There's a lot of wide receivers that go to Baltimore to die. And I'm afraid of that for D-Hop because, Lamar is obviously not the pass first quarterback. In my opinion, D-Hop's not the best blocker. So this, what does this relationship look like? Does Jackson kind of switch up his game style for D-Hop? Who knows? But I do agree that it gives Lamar another weapon. Speaking of Lamar, he got a new backup in Cooper Rush. We'll get into this a little bit later, but it makes absolutely no sense for me. If I had to pick a quarterback that was the least amount like Lamar Jackson, it would probably be Cooper Rush. It doesn't make sense for Cooper Rush to come in if Lamar gets hurt and for your offense to pick up right where it left off. That's absolutely no sense. But again, love and hate for the Baltimore Ravens. The Stanley extension. I love the Stanley extension. They were pretty quiet, right? Not a lot of big moves, but again, they didn't have a lot of money, guys. But at the same time, they didn't have a lot of expiring contracts. So we're going to see a lot of the same Baltimore Ravens next year, adding in D-Hop and bringing back Stanley. Again, the hate. Back to the Cooper Rush deal. Lamar and Cooper Rush are probably, the most apples and oranges of the NFL. Cooper Rush is not a mobile quarterback. The signing just didn't make sense to me. It just seemed like a waste of money. I agree that, you might have upgraded in talent, but at the same time, say Lamar goes down, you're going to have to then change your offense because you have Cooper Rush at quarterback instead of a Josh Johnson or a DTR or, you know what I mean? Like just other opportunities that I think they may have had. Cooper Rush is definitely questionable in my eyes. Moving on to the Buffalo Bills. A lot of in-house names, guys. A lot of in-house names got brought back. A lot of in-house names got extended. One new face, though. One new face and one big new face is going to be Joey Bosa. One thing I loved about the Buffalo Bills, I loved how they retained all their players before the market was set. Shakir 15, Greg Rousseau 20, and Terrell Bernard 12.5. So again, these are young cornerstone pieces for them. And I feel like they got them at a very, very, very good price. Very good price. One thing I do hate about the Buffalo Bills free agency, though, was how expensive Joshua Palmer was. They brought in a new wide receiver, another new face, wide receiver Joshua Palmer that just played for the Chargers. I didn't like how expensive he was. He's going to be filling in for more of a Mac Hollins role. Not sure that he really raises the bar, but again, at the same time, he doubled the price tag. So what does your money look like at that point? I don't feel like he's anything special at the end of the day because, again, I feel like he would have come out in a Charger uniform being with Justin Herbert. Their obviously sense of need for wide receiver. I don't think they would have let him go for that contract if he was really that special. So, moving on to the Carolina Panthers. Couple big names. They had a solid free agency, guys. Safety Trayvon Mulring. Corner, they extended back J.C. Horn. defensive tackle Trayshawn Wharton. We'll get into him a little bit later. And they brought in a running back, Rico Dowdle, which will be interesting. A couple things I did love about the Carolina Panthers, just really some of the smaller moves, right? Rico Dowdle last year broke out the last 6 weeks in Dallas. He was a 1,000-yard rusher. You added a 1,000-yard rusher to Chuba Hubbard. I mean, that's quite scary for Bryce Young. 2,000-yard rushers? Okay. Let's add to this offense, right? Andy Dalton was even good business, in my opinion. Andy Dalton stepped in last year after Bryce Young got hurt. Got benched. I apologize. Got benched. Andy Dalton stepped in. Bryce Young came back. I feel like Andy Dalton is more of a mentor, is more of a vital piece to this offense, really. And at the end of the day, if Bryce Young doesn't live up to the hype, if he gets injured, well, you have Andy Dalton, who was just in this offense last year. I think it was good business. A couple things I did hate, though, were the big deals. J.C. Horn being one of them. I thought last year he looked healthy again, but I didn't see anything that made him the highest paid corner in the NFL, right? As a reasonable response to his career arc. I just, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't playing like that a couple years ago. And now he's the highest paid. Like due to his career arc, I just don't think that the contract makes sense. I like Mollering, but he's not a top 5 safety like his contract says he is. He's just not. Talent at this point is where it's at. Wharton, in my opinion, and a lot of people will argue with me, Wharton, in my opinion, this year was the highest overpaid contract in the NFL. I'm not a big Trayshawn Wharton fan. I think he's a glorified run stopper. I think that even in that fact, there's better run stoppers out there. For me, it was a bad signing and a desperate move. A lot of bad teams get caught up in the free agency lights. A lot of bad teams make bad signings just to be able to fill the void. For me, next team, Chicago. Another good team that had a really good free agency, in my opinion. Joe Thuney. They traded for Joe Thuney. They got on that offensive line. Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman, focused on the other side of the line, the trenches, the defense. Grady Jarrett. I liked it. Some of it I liked, some of it I didn't. Let's get into that. One thing I did love about the Bears is the Thuney trade. Okay? He's one of the best guards in the NFL. I don't think that's much up for argument. One of the best. He was just protecting Patrick Mahomes for quite a while. And now you add him to the Bears that bled interior pressures. It's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. For what they gave up, the price tag it was to get Thuney, they won that trade. Hands down. One thing I did hate was how much the defensive line renovation was costing. Typically bad teams overpay lots of money. Let's be honest. Grady Jarrett's best years are probably behind him. Right? I can never pronounce his name right. I'll butcher it. But Adebayo is a good rotational piece. But again, both of these guys got signed for starter money, and I don't think they're starters. Grady Jarrett is a questionable starter. I think the other guy is a rotational piece. For both of these guys, I just have to see the impact on the field. They're paid as impact starters. I have to see the impact on the field. That's just is what it is. Next team is going to be Cincinnati. Again, big free agency for them. Spent a lot of money. Excuse me. Obviously extended Higgins and Chase. Re-signed Mike Gesicki and B.J. Hill. A couple things I do love about the Cincinnati Bengals. The Chase and Higgins signing, obviously. Just a year ago, I would have told you that it was not physically possible, financially possible for them to get it done. If it wasn't impossible, then it was extremely unlikely due to the way that they handled T. Higgins, the way that Jamar Chase was just upset. A year or two ago. Obviously, with the trio here, they stay in contender status, right? Let's say contender with a big on the end because their defense is a big question mark, a huge question mark. One thing I didn't like, the Bengals did well to pepper a thin defensive chart. Oren Burks, the return of Hill. They just last year they're not big signings. Like what do they do for your defense? Your defense is really bad. These defensive signings you're making aren't changing they're not moving the needle. So what are they doing? They're adding depth. And I feel like for them, I feel like this whole draft class should be defense because good Lord. If they could just fix that defense, the Cincinnati Bengals guys would be scary. It would be scary, and I can admit that. Next team is going to be Cleveland. One thing I did like, obviously Myles Garrett returning. Anytime a team can keep an elite player, that's usually a good thing. It usually says good things. However, after the disgruntle, after the drama that was transpired, me personally probably would have traded him for draft capital, considering what you would have gotten back would have been a pretty penny. That's just where I was with the Myles Garrett. I would have traded him to possibly Philly, to Detroit, to Washington, to somebody would have paid for him. One thing I did hate, it's really tough to knock anything they did necessarily, but they have to answer the quarterback position. They have to answer the quarterback position because Kenny Pickett's not it. He's not. And could I see them taking Shedeur Sanders at 2? Absolutely. I do. If you pay attention to my mock drafts, he's at 2 to the Cleveland Browns. There's a reason why I think Russell didn't sign in Cleveland. I think because there's going to be a young star coming in. In New York, he has the chance to at least get a multi-year contract after this. Cleveland, he wouldn't have the chance. So for me, it's got to be Shedeur Sanders to Cleveland, guys. And I think that who do you start at the beginning of the season? Do you start Kenny Pickett or do you start Shedeur Sanders? But I just know that Kenny Pickett's not the answer in Cleveland. So that's the one thing I didn't like is how they kind of left that on the board. But again, if their plan was to go Sanders, then by all means. Into the Dallas Cowgirls. Hello. Love. What is there to love? They were really extremely quiet. We could talk about what Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. I mean, really, what's the point of conversation? They're cheap contracts, cheap rentals, and they just are dart throws that hopefully work out. One thing I did hate about Dallas is the silence of the Micah Parsons extension. What do we do with Micah Parsons at this point? Are we going to make him the highest paid defender? Are we going to make him the highest paid non-quarterback? What do we do in Dallas? We got Dak Prescott's contract. We got CDs. What do we do with Micah? Do we trade him? Do we let him walk? Let him go where he wants to go? There's so many questions. And I feel like before the market gets absolutely massively huge, like Garrett already made it, you have to get a deal done sooner than later, or you're just not going to get one at all. Denver. Next team is Denver. One thing I loved was their focus on defense. Look, by every metric almost, by any metric, last season they were one of the best defensive teams in football. They were. And that's coming from a Philly fan. They are scary. Now, they got Hufanga, they got Trey Greenlaw. Those guys are only going to bring physicality and speed to this defense already. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, injuries. So what about Hufanga and Greenlaw? They'd have injury concerns. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. My rebuttal would be they just did it last year without them. These guys are just additions. These guys are just extra pieces to the puzzle. It's scary, guys. It really is. Denver could be extremely good next year. Hate-wise, I don't necessarily hate anything. One thing for me would be, I know a lot of Bronco fans are probably a little bit higher on the Evan Ingram signing than I am. But I do think you need a tight end in a Sean Payton offense. I do agree there. I just think that Evan Ingram's not a strong blocker. Broncos already had no running game to begin with because they have no running back. But like having a tight end that doesn't know how to block is not going to help the situation. He'll help Bo Nix for sure. But I like the signing just because for Bo Nix, but like I said, there's different tangibles that I'm not as a fan as some of the Bronco fans are. Boom, we'll get right into Detroit. Detroit had a pretty good offseason, guys. Derek Barnes brought back Derek Barnes, DJ Reed, Marcus Davenport. One thing I did love was the retentions. DJ Reed replaces Carlton Davis, who left in free agency, which I think was huge. You replace him, you replace that with Reed. Then you got Terrion Arnold on the other side. I think that could be a nasty pair for quite some time. Tim Patrick comes back. I think that they kind of revitalized Tim Patrick a little bit. Whether it's Jared Goff, whether it was Ben Johnson's offense, whatever it was, we'll kind of see next year. But I think that was a good signing for Tim Patrick as well. I think he's a good wide receiver 3 for them. One thing I didn't like was the implications behind the Kyle Allen signing. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the signing. Everybody loves a veteran quarterback too. Everybody does. But for me, the Lions are making it clear that they do not trust Hendon Hooker. And that's a problem for me. They replaced him at quarterback 2 with Teddy Bridgewater last season. Bridgewater was coaching in high school at that point. And you brought in Teddy Bridgewater to beat this guy out on the depth chart without any sort of battle. I mean, I get the guy's got NFL experience, but I mean, at some point, again, he was just coaching high school football. And now it looks like Hendon Hooker is going to be behind Allen for the same job. So at this point, I'd be surprised if Hooker becomes a reliable backup anywhere. So I would not be surprised if it's this draft or next draft that the Lions draft a developmental quarterback like they did with Hooker. But obviously Hooker did not work out. And I really hope that that's not going to be the same for Joe Milton, because I think Joe Milton and Hooker both have potential in this league just as much as Michael Penix does. But we may never see it. Another one for me is going to be the next team is going to be Green Bay. Aaron Banks was a big one. Nate Hobbs was another one. What I loved was the headliner editions. Honestly, when Banks is hot, he's hot. I mean, he's a fearsome run blocker. He can pull really well from the left guard position or the right guard position. He really helps out your running game, which Josh Jacobs in the backfield, that could help things. That could help things for sure. Hobbs being one of the best slot receivers in the NFL, I think that they kind of needed that too. A couple of things I did not love were the numbers that were required to get both of them. Okay. Hobbs was 4 years, $48 million, and Banks was 4 years, $77 million. Okay. To me, I probably would have tapped out at probably about the 19 per year for Banks, about 20 maybe, and about 12 mil per Hobbs. It was just a little bit much for me. Banks' best ball was in the beginning of the 2023 season, which at this point in the NFL world was quite a while ago. Reportedly, the Packers are moving Hobbs to the outside, which is a challenging transition for a slot for a slot corner. How does that transition out? I don't think that either one of those players adds to a playoff push for the Green Bay Packers, especially since they have to move pieces around to see if it all fits. And it's just, I'm not a fan of that. So moving on to the Houston Texans. One thing I did for the Houston Texans, I love the C.J. Gardner trade. C.J. Gardner Johnson. And also the Larry Tunsil trade. I'll go on both of them, because we have to realize that, yes, they've had offensive line problems, but Larry Tunsil wasn't going to fix all the offensive line problems just by himself. So the return that they got on him was a second and a third from Washington, which is a pretty good value. I might be would have liked to seen a first in there, considering he was a first round pick and has been somewhat pretty good in his career so far. But again, a second and a third is not bad on a possible mega deal. So we'll see how that goes. But then shipping off Kenyon Green for Gardner Johnson was a good offloading. Just really on an offensive line that needed a culture reset. I mean, it just is what it is. Now, we'll get into the Philadelphia side of that later. But one thing I did hate was just the revamp for CJ Stroud. They added Trent Brown, they added Cam Robinson at tackle, traded for another guard, but all these players have been at least liabilities on another team. And it just, like, again, I'm going to say this a lot today, it just didn't move the needle. What does Stroud do from here? If he has O-line problems, is it going to be another Burrow situation? Is it going to be, what do we do here? We have to, at some point, focus on the offensive line. Next team is going to be the Indianapolis Colts. A couple big signings for them was going to be Charvarius Ward, ex-Chief corner. Cam Bynum came over from the Vikings. That was a good signing. I like the secondary. They did bring in Daniel Jones to have a little quarterback battle with Anthony Richardson, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But what I loved about the Indianapolis Colts was just the willingness to spend. Okay, when they signed Ward to a 3-year, $54 million deal, it represented one of the biggest free agency contracts in Indianapolis in recent memory. It's one of the bigger contracts and bigger signings that they have made of Chris Ballard's time in Indianapolis. Let's say that. And then boom, $15 million a year to Bynum. So two decent sized contracts. The Colts are probably one of the most committed. I don't want to say good because they're not. But committed drafting and developing teams. They don't make a lot of free agency signings usually. But look, Ward might be a CB1 on the outside, something they haven't had in years. And that automatically just raises their ceiling. So it'll be interesting to see. But one thing I didn't love was just the implications of the Jones signing. Okay. The 1-year, $14 million deal is fine for the value of the player. Adding a veteran quarterback to compete with Anthony Richardson is wise, in my opinion. Okay, so now you have 2 crapshoots instead of just one. But, excuse me, let's be very clear. However, if signing Jones to a 1-year bridge deal is good news for your team, that's probably a poor reflection of your team. This is what it is. Next team that we're going to be talking about is the Jacksonville Jaguars. We had talked about them at the beginning of free agency, a couple of their contracts that are really bad. But, one thing I just didn't like is the priorities. We'll get into that. But one thing I did love was the return to competency. Excuse me. The best thing bad teams can do in free agency is get veteran starters to fill the gaps, right? This not only raises the bar, but it raises the floor of the team because there's veterans in the locker room. I thought that both their signings of Patrick McCarry and their signing of, there's the center, Robert Hansley, on the offensive line, both on the offensive line. I thought that those kind of fit that narrative of the veteran signing. I don't think it was massive deals by any means, but I think this is exactly how a front office should reload a roster. One thing I didn't love was the priorities that the Jacksonville Jaguars have. They double dipped at tight end, replacing the departed Luke Farrell, right? Evan Ingram left. You replace them both with Hunter Long and Johnny Munt. Obviously, I think, in my opinion, Brenton Strange, obviously last year with Evan Ingram hurt, kind of stepped up into that role. I think he's still the presumed starter. With the Jordan Lewis signing, they did secure their slot corner position. But I thought they had a strong slot corner last year in Jaron Jones. So now where do you put him? Somebody's going to have to move to the outside. Most likely Jones, if he's going to want the starting reps. But again, I had talked about Jordan Lewis. I think he was way overpaid. Way overpaid. Next to Trayshawn Wharton, I think that he was one of the more overpaid players of this free agency as well. Next team is y'all's beloved Kansas City Chiefs. Brought back a couple players, Hollywood Brown, Nick Bolton, Trey Smith on a franchise tag, and brought in Jalen Moore to replace who did they lose at tackle? Yeah, to just solidify the left tackle position. One thing I did love was the re-signing of Brown, of Hollywood Brown. He's more impactful as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 than he is a wide receiver 1, in my opinion. Obviously, when Rashee Rice comes back, I think he does fall into that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Worthy has transitioned nice into the NFL. So for me, his $7 million deal is good business, because you got players out there like De'Ami Brown that just signed with Jacksonville for $10 million. Who would you rather have, De'Ami Brown or Hollywood Brown? You know what I mean? Like, it's just certain teams pay more than others do. It just is what it is, guys. A couple things I didn't like. The big swings. The Chiefs signed 4 deals of $10 million or greater. In how you say his name? Yeah, Christian Fulton. They have a much better CB2 option on the outside for only $10 million per season. Moore costs $15 per year. It'll look great if he ends up being their franchise left tackle, but if he doesn't, the contract looks dumb. You sign a backup to become a starter, and then if it doesn't work out, well, it doesn't work out, and that's just kind of silly. Bolton was also $15 million a year, where he's the culture of the defense. I can agree there, but I've watched too many offenses pick on him in coverage, and to really feel great about it. And for Trey Smith, I imagine the market-setting extension for Smith will eventually look okay. But for right now, he's sitting on a $23 million franchise tag, which makes him more than any guard playing this year. So, kind of like, what does that look like for the Kansas City Chiefs next year? Do they hold on to him, kind of deal? I think at this point, every move that the Kansas City Chiefs had made is defensible. It's arguable, but I didn't love a single one. Okay. Next team that we're going to talk about is the LA Chargers. One thing I did love was how the O-line was addressed. Okay, the way Becton isn't a perfect fit in a lot of teams and a lot of offenses, but I agreed with one team that he would have been a perfect fit for, and it was the LA Chargers. They were really smart to re-sign Bradley Bozeman. It was a quiet center class outside of Drew Dahlman. When he signed with the Bears, it kind of just went down from there. So them re-signing Bradley Bozeman was very smart. But one thing I didn't like was the neglect at wide receiver. I'll be real honest. Joshua Palmer leaving, that leaves Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson. They did sign Mike Williams, but come on, guys. Like, how many times are we going to try to ride this bike? It's frustrating. I hate it for Justin Herbert. I hate it for Ladd McConkey. But just the lack of wide receiver help for Herbert has been a problem for years now. So you think it would be maybe they bring in Keenan Allen still. There's still other options out there. Amari Cooper. But what are we waiting on? Next team is going to be the LA Rams. Honestly, guys, this is one of my favorite free agents classes. Outside of including extensions and signings and trades and some acquisitions. Obviously, is they extended Matthew Stafford. They bring in Devontae Adams. They bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. They re-sign Alaric Jackson. I think that for me, I just loved about just everything. Extending Jackson before the tackle market was set saved them so much money. So much money. Then they upgraded nose tackle with Poona Ford over Bobby Brown, who left in free agency. I think that Poona Ford will elevate Brandon Fisk and Jared Verse next year. They upgraded wide receiver with Adams, who is, let's be honest, aging way better than Cooper Kupp. He fills a nicer role opposite of Puka Nacua. And, of course, retaining Stafford after an open whatever thing with the trade market. I mean, he was going to New York. He was going to, it was bad. And then all of a sudden, boom, he's back in LA. Huge for them. One thing I didn't like, though, was them retaining Tutu Atwell over Demarcus Robinson. I understand that, Atwell has the trump card and it's speed. But if I'm filling a wide receiver 3 role, I'd much rather have Demarcus Robinson. Atwell averaged fewer receptions, fewer yards per reception last season by almost 4 yards. I like the upside of Demarcus Robinson better. We'll talk to him a little bit later about where he went. But I was surprised by that because I thought Demarcus Robinson was a solid player for the Rams last year. Moving on, we're going to move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. Key acquisitions and returning players this year. Geno Smith was the big one. Trade got paired back up with Pete Carroll. They got Alex Kappa from the Bengals. They brought in Jeremy Chin to replace Trayvon Mulring. They also got the corner from the Green Bay Packers, Eric Stokes. One thing I did love was the Smith trade. Without his acquisition, really the Raiders would have gotten an average grade. They had some good moves. Obviously, the Max Crosby extension, the gambles on Chin. But, I mean, the departures on defense were huge, in my opinion. Robert Spillane, Nate Hobbs, Trayvon Mulring, I think they're all impactful. I really do. But the Raiders, who were potentially not in position to get a top quarterback with the 6th overall pick in the draft, they do more than just solve their dilemma. They added a quarterback who couldn't reach his highest potential due to bad offensive lines and questionable play calling in Seattle. Let's be honest about it. Trading away a third to pay Smith $47 million a year, I think it's pretty good business, especially when that's a team in need. Next team we're going to talk about is Miami. The Miami Dolphins. A couple players that they got, they were real quiet. James Daniels was a big one. We'll talk about him. Wide receiver Nick Westbrook-Ikhine from the Tennessee Titans, and running back Alexander Madison over from the Vikings. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, he played for the Vikings, then he went to the Raiders. So over from the Raiders. I apologize. One thing I did like about the Miami Dolphins was the James Daniels signing. Honestly, this is one of my favorite moves of the entire free agency period. Perfect scheme fit in Miami. High floor for pass protection. He is a risk coming off a torn Achilles, but this is sort of a low floor, high ceiling gamble that they needed in case in a limited cap room, right? One thing I didn't love for the Miami Dolphins was letting Javon Holland walk out of the building. That was a big one for me. It probably had to happen, but he was so great for them before his 2023 season where he kind of got injured a lot. 2024 really didn't return to form, but man, he was a leader in the locker room. The playoff teams they kind of need that type of guy around, and I just don't think that Trayvon Mulring is going to replace Javon Holland that well. Next team we're going to talk about is the Minnesota Vikings. Key acquisitions, again, Minnesota had a really good free agency. Will Fries, Byron Murphy, Aaron Jones comes back. They bring in Ryan Kelly from the center position. One thing I did love, simple, is just the investment in the offensive line. Fries was one of my top free agent gems, if you will. I feel like he's one of the best players that nobody knows about. In Minnesota, he could possibly make a push for a Pro Bowl. I really could see it if he fully recovers from this tibia injury. Obviously, one thing I did not love was how much Jonathan Allen cost. In general, double dipping with Harrison Phillips, Javon Hargrave. I mean, typically it works out. However, I did not expect Allen to tip the financial scales at $17 million a year. The entire defensive tackle market came in way above my expectation, but I mean, maybe it's just the cost of doing business. But I didn't like it. He's now the 15th highest paid tackle, and Hargrave is the 18th. I can't fathom paying him $17 million a year. Can't do it. Next team is going to be New England, who had somewhat of an okay free agency. I think that they didn't really focus in the right areas, but we'll get into that. One thing I did love was the Morgan Moses signing. They got Milton Williams at defensive tackle, Stephon Diggs recently at wide receiver. They got a wide receiver 1 now. Carlton Davis brought over from Detroit. Morgan Moses brought over to the left tackle position. And then they brought in Harold Landry on the defensive line. So one thing I did love, again, was the Morgan Moses the signing. good contract. 3 years, $24 million for Moses, $8 million a year for a starting tackle is a great rate. He's above average when healthy. One thing I did not love, again, is the continuing gaps on offense. In free agency, for most teams, the objective is to plug enough gaps before the draft. That way, teams can draft for the value on the board and not reach for need, if that makes sense, right? You don't want to overreach just because you have no left guard. The Patriots, I mean, just they walked into free agency with glaring needs, wide receiver, offensive line, and I still feel like they share the same glare at those spots. And for me, again, I'm going to say this a lot. They didn't move the needle. They didn't move the needle from free agency to the draft. Again, the idea is to fill the gaps, and I don't feel like they did that. Next team we're going to talk about is the New Orleans Saints. This is going to be interesting. One thing I did like, they brought back players like Chase Young, Juwan Johnson, Tyrann Mathieu, and then they brought in players like Justin Reed from outside. And one thing I did love was the signing of the internal players. Both Young and Juwan Johnson had existing void years on their contracts, with dead money ready in the 2025 cap. So they kind of eliminated that. They basically backloaded everything for both of them. So I kind of like the way that they had moved around a few things, but one thing I didn't like is signing the external players, right? What are we doing? The Saints are supposed to be in a rebuild. That's not a shock to this world. The Saints are bad, and they're down bad, real bad. Why are we giving Justin Reed a 3-year deal? He's a good player. The contract's fine. But at this point, stop signing new deals. I mean, give all the snaps that you're going to give to Reed to a third rounder, draft and develop. This is why we keep having to go back and they had to reconstruct Carr's contract. It's just the Saints organization is very, very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. Anyway, so we're going to move on to the Giants first. The Giants. Very good free agency. Very good free agency. A couple players that they had gotten was Javon Holland. Recently signed Russell Wilson. Corner from New Orleans, Paulson Adebo. They brought back Darius Slayton. We'll get to him a little bit later. But one thing I did love was how they invested in the secondary. The Giants' defensive backfield was tough watch. Defensive backfield was a tough watch at the end of the season. I think that adding veterans like Holland and Debo, I really think that Debo could have been a CB1 out of Marshawn Lattimore's shadow in New Orleans. And Holland was honestly set to become one of the league's best safety before his injuries in 2023. So, I kind of like the value for what they got there. But what I hate about this is really just about every deal, right? Money-wise, I did not like this for the Giants. Honestly, I thought that Adebo would get a 1-year contract just to prove he's healthy following the major leg injury. Not nearly a market-setting extension by any means, especially. Instead, he got as much money as Byron Murphy Jr. and Ward. got on their deals. So, and he actually got more than DJ Reed got on his deal. So, like I said, market setting extension was not wrong. I'm also surprised that they valued Darius Slayton at $12 million a year. I just don't like. The Giants spent more guaranteed money in this free agency cycle than all but two teams. It's just bad. I mean, at least the quarterback deals are cheap, but it's just I did not like anything that the value-wise, money-wise that the Giants had really pulled off this year. Moving on, we are going on to the Jets. We are going down to the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams, guys. Only got 8 teams left. We're going on to the New York Giants. New York Jets. I get those two always mixed up. They're both poverty franchises. The Jets, a couple players they brought back were German Sherwood and Andre Cisco. And they took a gamble on Justin Fields, and we'll get into that because I think that's my love. I love the Fields gamble. In my opinion, if there's a good candidate for a Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield-esque recovery, it is Fields, right? Who simply just has not enjoyed a good offensive environment in the NFL. I think that Garrett Wilson staying, I think he could really have a solid, especially fantasy year, with the running back room that he has in Garrett Wilson. So interesting to see. But one thing I did not like was the secondary approach. They gave Brandon Stevens, who a corner, $12 million a year. I'm not really sure who they were competing with to be able to do that, but he was one of the most targeted cornerbacks last season, and he gave up more expected points added, which is the EPA in the NFL terms, as the nearest defender in coverage. So, and the 8.5 for Cisco just really also exceeded my expectations. These are special teams guys. So for just, again, I'm a real stickler on the money, man. Call me a cheapo, but it is they're just bad contracts. Moving down to the Philadelphia Eagles. Here we go. Big players. Zach Bond obviously coming back. Lane Johnson got his extension. We bring in players like Aziz Al-Jaruri, and I promise I'm going to get that right, bro. I promise. And then Joshua Uche. And then in the trade, we got Kenyon Green, right? Couple things I loved. The dart throws. Okay, and I'll go into more further details. Listen, for the Philadelphia Eagles, it was never going to be a big year for a free agent acquisition. We had to retain Bond, and so we had to take our lumps elsewhere. To account for the departure of Josh Sweat, obviously we get both Uche and Al-Jaruri. Tight end Dallas Goedert might be traded, so we sign Harrison Bryant, Galen Granson from Indianapolis, and we get Adoree Jackson as well, who might be our CB2. Okay. One thing I did hate, and Chosen's going to love this. I hated the CJ Gardner trade. I think that's about the only thing that I really could stand out that I absolutely hated about this offseason, about this free agency class. And in retrospect, in stats-wise, Green has been one of the league's worst starting guards since the Texans have drafted him in 2022. Now, of course, there are plenty of reasons in Philadelphia that we're very up high lifting because of our offensive line coach being one of the best in the league, right? There's a lot of high ceiling in that. He's very young, quite athletic. I just really think he was in a bad offensive line environment in Houston. Again, he's just another dart throw for Philadelphia to replace Becton. But this one is going to be more of, does it work out, than the other ones were for me. But why it's a problem is because sending C.J. Gardner-Johnson to as a part of the trade is what indubitably makes it worrisome. Especially since the Eagles added no replacement. C.J. Gardner-Johnson didn't always see eye to eye with his teammates or the fans, but the quality of his play cannot be denied, guys. The energy that he brought to the field cannot be denied. So, be interesting to see what we do in the draft to replace that. Next team is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. First thing and foremost, the one thing I liked was the Metcalf trade, getting Metcalf. He's far from the perfect player. How he fits with George Pickens isn't really clear because I think that they're both physical wide receivers. But obviously they needed more offensive power, and Metcalf is the definition of offensive power. The other thing that I did not love was spending all this time waiting on Aaron Rodgers to sign. What are we left with if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign? Mason Rudolph for 2025? Like, that doesn't make sense. We're going to have to make a trade. They're going to have to trade up and risk it all for the biscuit. And it's just, it's goofy. It's goofy. I can see them taking Jackson Dart, but, come on, let's not be silly here. So I think they put, again, a franchise has put way too much power and way too much responsibility into Aaron Rodgers' hands, and it's screwing them, just like the Jets did. Next team we're going to talk about is the San Francisco 49ers. Had a very interesting free agency. A lot of people left. Not a lot of people came to San Francisco. One person that I did like was the Demarcus Robinson signing. I feel like, to me, he's a great wide receiver 3 or 4. He has great size, athleticism, ball skills. But he also brings the utility as a blocker for CMC or Isaac Guerendo, Jordan Mason, these type of players. And really, that's about it. What I didn't love was the fact that the biggest deal the team signed was for Luke Farrell. Just very low risk moves, and it just didn't make a lot of sense for the amount of people that left. The amount of people that they brought back in just didn't make a lot of sense. Next team is going to be the Seattle Seahawks. Again, I think that very good free agency class if it were in 2020. Kupp is a dominant wide receiver 1. In 2020, Lawrence still has the legs as a pass rusher. Jaron Reed, they signed, is still a solid starting defensive tackle and run stopper. MVS is still a field stretcher. Now the Sam Darnold contract really doesn't make sense in any hypothetical world, so bear with me. But some of the moves that they had made make sense. Now, however, what I hated was the absolute inexcusable neglect of the offensive line. How are we going to throw Sam Darnold into a situation to where he just went from Minnesota to you guys, and you guys focus on nothing when it comes to the offensive line? It's going to be interesting to see, and I think that they wasted a lot of money on Sam Darnold because they were not ready for Sam Darnold. Their offensive line is shit, and I think Sam Darnold's going to pay for it. Next team is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Couple players come back: Chris Godwin, Levante David, new face on the defensive line, Hassan Reddick. One thing I did love was the continuity. Honestly, I don't think you'll find the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on many winner list or loser list. But for me, how they spent their money, they did pretty well. Considering they signed their starting guard for $11 million a year, which is a huge discount considering we just talked about Banks and Will Fries getting nearly 22. And, and speaking of $22 million a year in retaining Godwin, that was a relative discount considering a lot of teams were going to pay him for wide receiver one money on other teams. So, but the best news is the players that are brought back, they know how to work in the system. So again, this is just another team that we're going to see a lot of familiar faces around next year when they run it back. One thing I did hate was the Kyle Trask extension. It might feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. But I prefer my contending teams to take a quarterback two a little bit more seriously. Trask has exactly attempted 11 passes. Yeah, 11 passes in NFL action and completed 4 of them. What if happens if Baker Mayfield goes down? What if the Bucs are 7-4 in the thick of the NFC South race with a month to go? Do they trust Trask to go 2-2? I don't. I mean, they know better than me, but I don't. Next team we're going to talk about is the Tennessee Titans. Got one more team after this, guys. Key acquisitions for the Tennessee Titans was Dan Moore, Cody Barton from the Broncos defense. Thought that was a pretty good signing. One thing I loved was how serious the Titans were about their offensive line, for sure. I think they're gearing up for Cam Ward, which makes it a lot easier for Cam to be excited about coming to Tennessee. I think that they signed Dan Moore to ensure that J.C. Latham that they drafted a couple years ago gets to play more natural on the right side than he does the left. I feel like they just moved some pieces around and it was a really good I think it was a good offensive line floor raiser for either Will Levis or a rookie quarterback, which I think it's going to be. Okay. Last team we're going to talk about, guys. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. We need to talk about the hate. The hate is going to be the impact of the money. Okay. The impact of the money, just solely in the fact of Moore is likely to be an okay starter at left tackle. But in all reality, for the entirety of the almost $85 million in guaranteed money spent, which was the 7th among most teams this season, there was a lack of punch. There was no solid signing. I can't fathom putting them in a high grade for some of those signings. Last team we're going to talk about here tonight, guys, is the Washington Commanders. One thing I did love was and I'm going to butcher his name, but I know he's a solid player. The return of cornerback Noah Igbin. I can't even say it. I'm not even going to try it. But I just feel like, with getting Debo, the draft capital was okay. I feel like they definitely run that trade. The same as Larry Tunsil, but we'll just call him Noah. Noah had solidified himself as a starting nickelback last year over the course of 2024. I think that allowed Mike Sandstrom to be on the outside most of the year last year, and I think it helped both of them. So I'm glad that they got him back. One thing I did not love about the Washington Commanders, though, is the Kinlaw deal. Any team that makes as many transactions as the Commanders did will make probably a few questionable ones, right? Kinlaw maxed out as really a rotational defensive tackle who didn't work out for the 49ers, a team that had a high success rate in developing defensive linemen. He also didn't work out for the Jets. I don't think that he replaces Jonathan Allen that well. So, again, guys, I appreciate you. That is all 32 teams. We are done for the night. Again, boom. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate all the love and support. Give us a follow on all the platforms, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok as well. Please and thank you. We are powered by Sports Lounge Media, and we are sponsored by the Mogul brand. Again, we just did 32 teams, free agency. Come check us out sometime. We got some good content over here. Draft is coming up, so we're going to be doing some mock drafts here pretty shortly, and it's going to be a good time. So, again,